the Szabo cast. Here we discuss all things from a working class, trans anarchist analytical perspective. Due to the nature of this show, listener discretion is advised. My name is Skylar, my pronouns are she, they, they, and I'm your host. Thank you for joining us today.
So what do we say about the Israel-Palestine conflict when there is a myriad of differing opinions on all sides of this conflict, and there doesn't seem to be any myopic, singular good take to be had from this? Well, I'd like to introduce one concept to my audience. You don't need a hot take. You don't even need a take. What you do need is a stance. I think even having a baseline understanding of the conflict over in Palestine is not enough. It's not sufficient for a meaningful and constructive discourse on this topic. But even a debate on the topic at hand isn't really meaningful in the first place, because we're debating as to whether or not it is legitimate to genocide an entire people group. I think the first thing that we need to remember is that the people who live in this occupied area on all fronts aren't monolithic in their culture, and that's a good thing. I bring this up because sometimes you'll hear people say that Arabic people are homophobic, and somehow that is justification for the genocide of Palestinians. That is absolutely not at all whatsoever a legitimate argument to genocide people. And I would argue that there is no legitimate reason to genocide people. Speaking for myself as a queer and trans person, I think it is absolutely disgusting that people are using the struggle of queer and trans people as a half-assed attempt to bolster the public relations image of the nation-state of Israel. Not to mention, even if a lot of people in Palestine happen to be homophobic and it runs through tradition, well, so does the United States. And the United States has no right to point fingers at another country that is currently being genocided on such a disingenuous and double-standard claim that their culture is homophobic. And we also must remember that it is not just white, queer, and trans people's lives who matter here. It is all queer and trans people's lives that matter, which is to say that there are queer and trans people who live in Palestine. We're here, we're queer, get used to it, we're everywhere, even in countries that are being affected by imperialism. No ally, even with good intentions, would knowingly make this argument in good faith. That we must enact genocide because a culture happens to be homophobic. Because hypothetically, even assuming that this bogus statement is true, you are not just genociding the homophobes, and it is absolutely not in the agenda of the IDF and the CIA to exclude the trans and queer people whom they are genociding. No, queer and trans people are also on the front lines of that genocide as well. Do you think when the IDF bombs a fucking hospital that they check to make sure that all of the patients are queer and trans before they bomb the hospital? The answer is a resounding no, and such an assertion is so absolutely bogus and divorced from a genuine understanding of the problem at hand that we can rule this out as another example of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Not to mention that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, for those who are wondering what I mean by that acronym, they bomb children too. So do you think that if the IDF is already bombing indiscriminately even towards children, that they are also going to avoid bombing queer and trans people? I don't fucking think so. And this is to say that no matter what policy stance the nation-state of Israel has on queer and trans people, it is to say that that is not reciprocal to queer and trans people abroad. So Palestine is not a monolith, but what about Israel? Is Israel a monolith? I think the first thing that we need to understand is that the nation-state of Israel is a state of class rule, meaning that the actions of Netanyahu do not always reflect the citizens that Netanyahu governs over. And that is to say that not every Jewish person agrees with the nation-state of Israel and its apartheid state against Palestine. I mention this because some people will say that being against the nation-state of Israel and its action, it makes you anti-Semitic. Well, let's talk about that for a second here. Every nation-state deserves to be criticized no matter what, especially if it is dominating people unjustly so. Anti-Semitism has a history of individuals, peoples, and people groups being ostracized and marginalized from their communities, i.e. the Eastern European pogroms. I would also argue that calling Israel a quote-unquote Jewish state, it's like calling the United States a Christian nation. And speaking for myself, as somebody who is virulently against the idea of a Christian theocracy in the United States, or even at all for that matter, I think calling Israel a Jewish state in and of itself is anti-Semitic. And let me explain. Because not all Jewish people are Israeli. Not all Jewish people are white. Not all Jewish people come from the same place, practice the same culture, practice the same tradition. Jewish people are not monolithic. And that is to say that when engaging in this kind of conversation, we need to understand that there's a clear difference between the actions of the people and the actions of the state that not only dominate over those people, but also represent those people on a global scale. When we talk about the very heavy subject of genocide and war, we need to also remember that it is not the nation state that is being affected the most crucial. It is the people that the nation state governs over. Hamas does not represent all Palestinians, and the nation state of Israel, as well as Netanyahu, do not always represent the views and opinions that are held by the citizens of the occupied territory. Now, that is to say that the people who live in the occupied territory, that is the nation state of Israel, they experience a wealth of privilege that a lot of Palestinians obviously do not have. But there's another thing that we need to talk about that is commonly brought up when talking about Palestine and Israel, and that is the attack that took place on October 7th committed by Hamas onto Israeli citizens. A bit over 1,400 Israelis, mostly civilians, were killed, including 260 people who were attendees of the music festival that night. A lot of these civilians were unarmed and they were just partygoers, and it was reported that around 5,000 projectiles were launched from the Gaza Strip. There's a lot to unpack here because the United States already does a whole lot of significant funding for the IDF as it is. And speaking for myself, as an American, I get a lot of IDF propaganda in my social media feed. And a lot of it is very genocidal shit, like when they try to tell me that they're gonna squish the bugs. Yeah, Arsen Ostrovsky is what we call an international human rights lawyer, and he's a proud Zionist all at the same time. Yeah, this feels reminiscent of when Nazis fled to Argentina to avoid the Nuremberg trials, but I digress. Because on October 13th of 2023, he posted an image of a cockroach with the head of what I assume to be a Palestinian person with blood on their teeth and a long-ass tongue and red eyes. It's just very reminiscent of the Islamophobic posters I used to see outside of a barber shop on Glen Oaks Boulevard of Burbank, California during the war on terror that was committed by the United States in the mid-2000s. And this racist cartoon roach is being squashed by a boot that has the letters IDF on it. The only context that Arsen Ostrovsky gave on his Twitter account was this with an exclamation point. This tactic doesn't make sense for someone who considers themselves to be a human rights lawyer, but it makes all the sense for someone who considers themselves a proud Zionist. Because this tactic to make the enemy look like vermin and bugs and insects is a very similar tactic to what the Nazis would use to justify killing the Jews in the Holocaust. A quick Google search will show you that there are plenty of images of Jews being portrayed as maggots with long noses, depicted as crawling all over the globe. There's another one that's also very interesting that has a bunch of mice running up to a store, and all of these mice have long noses on them. Now, to fully describe this meme to you, I may be German, but I don't speak German. I think German is a fucking weird language. I think anybody who tries to argue that they are genetically superior and speak that kind of language, that, my friend, is somebody who is off their fucking rocker. So, full transparency, I am using Google Translate here to translate this comic, and it pretty much says, in the first panel, people of Germany, and it has a broom sweeping out a bunch of rats out of their house, I assume? And in the second panel, the rats are running towards a door that has the word democratic countries written on it in German. And there's a bottom text where I'm relying on Google Translate again to translate for me. It says, they should be fine if we release them and make them available to others. This type of rhetoric is unmistakably marginalizing. It is otherizing a people group for democratic countries that the fascist nation, being Germany in this case, is trying to remove. And I also want to remind people of a few more things about this topic here. Genocide looks different between different cultures, between different time periods, and between the different tactics used by the genociding nation. And although this Holocaust meme that I just dissected to you very poorly, I might add, may not be advocating for outright violence against the Jewish community of Germany, although that is what ended up happening anyway, it is still advocating for a hatred and an otherization of a people group that is being marginalized in the community. They are still advocating for their removal, for their extermination. Forced removal is a fascist tactic to get liberals interested in sympathizing with fascists as a more pragmatic and non-violent way to do genocide. But just like in Nazi Germany, and just like the nation-state of Israel, we all know that genocide does not lead to non-violence. So this proud Zionist, aka a human rights lawyer, is advocating for genocide. Now, to his credit, he did delete this tweet. Because, of course, if you want liberals to sympathize with your genocide that you are advocating, you kind of have to try to not look like the Nazis. Because, of course, as he's a proud Zionist, his opinions have not changed. He removed that tweet specifically to stop looking bad on the internet. Which, I mean, okay, I can give you credit where credit's due. You don't want to look bad on the internet, especially if you call yourself a human rights lawyer. Now, there are some talking points that are perpetuated by Israeli propaganda that I think we really need to talk about, because some of this shit is so wild and so off the hinges. We really just need to check in on the nation state of Israel and see if it's really being coherent or not, because holy shit. I just want to warn my audience that the following description of what I'm about to talk about is some really deranged shit. Like, if you saw somebody else posting this level of, like, graphic, violent, bloodthirsty content on your newsfeed, like if this was your friend or some influencer that you were following, you would report them to whatever social media website that you were on. You'd probably also tell people to stop following this person, and you'd probably also tell people to maybe keep an eye on them, because holy shit, they might snap one day. Now take that, and it's the state of Israel. Like, literally on Instagram, at State of Israel, the account that goes under. It's some really deranged shit. And of course, I'm not going through all of it, and I am recording on October 28th as of right now. So if anything comes up that is new or something gets deleted, just know that as of right now, I am looking at the actual webpage, and I'm not relying on screenshots that were sent to me. I'll start with something that is a little bit more tame, but also predates the attack that took place on October 7th, just to kind of give you an idea as to what the nation state of Israel is posting on Instagram when it's not going to war with Palestine, quote unquote. On September 4th, 2023, a screenshot of a tweet that they posted reads, "There aren't enough words in the English language to describe how absurd this article from the New York Times is. Good thing we have Hebrew and Yiddish." Below this screenshotted tweet is a highlight of the New York Times article that they wrote about Israel. Assuming the highlighted part of this article is the part of the article that the nation state of Israel takes issue with, here's what it says. Hebrew, which officially became the national language of the state of Israel in 1948, is spoken by about 9 million people around the world. For some, the language symbolizes far-right Israeli militarism. End quote. So the issue that Israel has stated here is that there is an exclusion of the Yiddish language in their article, which is a little strange because that would be the weirdest thing for an entire nation state to get mad at one article about. Sure, it's a little not thorough, but at the very least, it's not like the biggest offense in the world. If anything, this is more of a criticism of the author's ignorance on the culture at hand, which they have every right to say. However, They did also highlight the part that says the language symbolizes far-right Israeli militarism, which means that there's no way in fucking hell that the only thing that the state of Israel is mad at when it comes to this article is that they didn't mention the Yiddish language. No. In fact, I wonder what other people are saying about that part of the highlighted article. One person said, the far right is a new word leftists are using to describe traditional and normal. Another person says, who are the losers that equate the Jewish language with far-right militarism? Another person says, if Hebrew symbolizes far-right Israeli militarism, what does Arabic and English symbolize? To that last one, I must say that I can't speak about the Arabic language because I don't really know Arabic, and I'm not Arabic myself. But in terms of English, holy shit, you are so close to getting the point. Especially considering the history of British imperialism and the expansion of the United States Empire. Yeah, English has a very genocidal history as well. It's also a very stupid fucking language. Just look at the word enough and tell me that that word is consistent with the rest of the fucking language. No, you can't. English-speaking global superpowers have just as much blood on their hands as the State of Israel does. There's one really interesting point that comes from a Palestinian supporter that reads, any comment on the very real threat of Israel's far-right militarism though? To which someone who comments below that person says, I smell communism with a vomit emoji. I'm sorry that this is the level of commentary that we have evolved towards now, especially considering that we are citing social media here, but this is coming straight from the actual state of Israel, and this is the kind of subtle messaging that they are trying to convey to their viewers and to their citizens. And this is to say that even before October 7th, they were trying to drum up some kind of hatred towards the opposition, that is, the media in this case. This level of ostracization of the New York Times, although the New York Times themselves is very flawed, especially when reporting on trans issues, this is a very specific tactic being used by the State of Israel that dates back to Nazi Germany once again. It's called Lügenpresse. And you know what's interesting? Americans today use it as well. So the word Lügenpresse translates from German as lying press, which basically means false news, fake news. Does that sound familiar? So even though the State of Israel is upset about the fact that the New York Times did not include the Yiddish language, they are subtly attempting to drum up a backlash against the author of this article, who dare call the State of Israel and the IDF a form of far-right Israeli militarism. But what if I told you that this exclusion of the Yiddish language from this article is not even really a thing? Yeah, the State of Israel lied to you. The Yiddish language is represented in the very next paragraph of this article. Yeah, I'm not kidding. It's like literally the next part of the article. Here's what that part of the article says. In contrast, Yiddish represents exile, a longing for home. It was the backbone of the Jewish labor movement in the United States, and the feminist Emma Goldman championed women's equality and free love in Yiddish. Abraham Cunningham, the feisty commanding editor-in-chief of the Forward, the left-leaning Yiddish daily in New York at the turn of the century, saw the language as a tool for educating Jewish immigrants about their rights. Also, this New York Times op-ed piece is literally called Yiddish is Having a Moment. The article is about the Yiddish language. So the State of Israel is so disconnected from the broader global Jewish community that they have to drum up some kind of fake controversy by excluding the very real Jewish history that they are accusing the author of this article of doing in the first place. Emma Goldman is a big name in the anarchist community. She attempted to, do something very bad to the President of the United States at the time. Something I can't say without violating YouTube's terms of services and risking the Secret Services visiting my house for the second time. Both of these things I don't want to happen. But that is to say, she's part of Jewish history. A major part of Jewish history, especially here in the United States. Okay, I'm going to stop hyper-focusing on this one particular post, and I'm going to kind of rapid fire through a bunch of their other posts that precede the events taking place on October 7th, just because I really want to drive home the point that the mentality of the people who are running this nation state. The first post that I want to focus on is the one that was posted on September 11 of 2023. It has a picture of the One World Trade Center with 9/11 Never Forget, and the caption reads, "Today on hashtag September 11, we stand in solidarity with the American people and remember the more than 2,700 innocent victims murdered. May their memories be a blessing," with a candle emoji. Now, I understand that I read that very funny, but there's a couple errors just in that caption alone. First of all, they used the wrong use of the word then. It's supposed to be than, T-H-A-N, not then. Their use of the word then, which has an E in it, is supposed to tell the listener that there's something happening after the fact. The state of Israel is trying to use the word than, which has an A in it, which pretty much means there is more than something. There is more of something. Normally, I don't go out looking for grammatical errors like this, especially with someone whom I disagree with and I'm debating with. And I'm very against the concept of picking on someone who doesn't speak English very well, especially if it's not their first language. That's just fucked up, mean, and bullying. But this is a nation state making this error. Not to mention only 2,700 innocent victims murdered. Where did you fucking get that number from? You're missing like nearly 300 people in that figure. The most accurate number of innocent victims that we had from that attack is 2,996 people. That's the most common number of people that we associate with that day. And it's usually rounded up to 3,000 for the sake of brevity, which is something you can easily do to 2,700 as well. So then why the fuck did you put 2,700 innocent victims and not 2,996 or 3,000 for that matter? The only way this could be misconstrued is if for some reason they decided to go on 4chan and get some hypothetical offshoot conspiratorial number that actually had nothing to do with the attack on September 11, 2001. Even if I was an American nationalist and a pro-Zionist, I would still find this post to be rather offensive just because it's wildly inaccurate. But I want to focus more on the messaging of never forget being implemented in this image. Never forget is an interesting phrase that is commonly used by Americans when talking about 9/11. But this is also echoing another sentiment that was expressed by the State of Israel on April 17th on Instagram, where they memorialized the 80 years since the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in Nazi Germany. It's kind of interesting because they're memorializing a very real atrocity that took place during the Holocaust, and they're also commemorating the people who fought back against that atrocity, which I deeply respect. It's kind of interesting when you look into their caption because they go through a large timeline of Jewish resistance against the Nazis, having spoken about their living conditions, them being deported to extermination camps following the uprising, and how a lot of Jewish people risked their lives to fight this uphill battle against their own marginalization. It's a sad story, and it's good that it's being memorialized here, but it's by the State of Israel. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here, so I want to continue from that point to the next post. It's about Anne Frank, and it's about how her life was cut short, how on June 12th, she would have turned 94 as of that day. Anne Frank was a Jewish girl who was a victim of the Nazi occupation during the Holocaust. I read her book in middle school, and it's one of those really eye-opening stories that really tell the whole picture as to how horrific the whole damn thing was. Living in the attic of one of your friends' house, having to make sure that even your step isn't too loud, and just that melancholy, hollow lack of closure at the end, where you kind of know that what happened to her didn't end well. Because she didn't really write, yo, the Nazis got me, I'm gonna be exterminated on this day. No, it just kind of ends on a cliffhanger. Anyway, back to the main post that we're talking about here from the State of Israel. They quoted Anne Frank saying, "What is done cannot be undone, but one can prevent it happening again." I just find this post to be absolutely appalling, considering that it's happening again but with a different player at hand here. Another post from August 13th is a parody of the Barbie movie. Yeah, they couldn't even leave that alone. They said in their caption, Hezbollah has recently announced a ban of the Barbie movie in Lebanon for promoting homosexuality. This is the only Barbie movie Lebanese fans will be able to watch this summer. And in the image, it has a picture of Hassan Nasrallah, a Lebanese politician that the Israeli Defense Forces assassinated in 1992. There are two problems with this image here, and I haven't finished describing it, so bear with me. One is that this is an entire generalization of Lebanese people. First of all, Hezbollah only takes up 15% of their parliament. So even if this ban is true, they do not have all the fucking power in the world to ban Barbie. So this is blown wildly out of proportions already just on that alone. And while it is true that Hezbollah as well as its organization are very anti-Semitic, historically so, they put the word barbarian on top of Hassan Nasrallah's face. And since we're talking about policies from both countries, Israel and Lebanon, and of course since the state of Israel has a history of trying to convey its viewers that both the state and the people are one and the same, are they now saying that Lebanese people are somehow barbaric themselves? Because that's a double standard. But okay, let's no longer beat around the bush. So October 7th is when the attack took place. Here is what U.S. President Joseph Biden has to say.
Since this terrorist attack took place, we've seen it described as Israel's 9/11. But for a nation the size of Israel, it was like 15 9/11s.
That's fucking dumb. I don't even think it really matters, but just the fact that he decided to take the size of Israel and compare what happened to Israel to the United States in terms of death toll, it's so fucking laughable. In addition, I'm going to quote another New York Times article that was written recently. $1,400 billion for Israel. The package would go almost entirely towards defense contracts and facilitating the transfer of weapons and ammunition to Israel from U.S. stockpiles. According to the White House, ammunition from the missile defense system known as the Iron Dome and David Sling, as well as the Iron Beam, Israel's ground-based laser air defense system would be covered in the package. Congressional leaders have said that the package will also include precision-guided munition kits that turn regular bombs into precision weapons and artillery shells.
Today, I'm also announcing $100 million in new U.S. funding for humanitarian assistance in both Gaza and the West Bank. This money will support more than 1 million displaced and conflict-affected Palestinians, including emergency needs in Gaza.
This is the United States empire covering their butts for funding a genocide. $100 million of humanitarian aid towards Palestinians is definitely a major plus. But it is not the same thing as $14.3 billion for Israel on their new fancy fucking Paw Patrol toys. And this also comes at a time when Joseph Biden is implementing $13.6 billion for border security. Border security, I might add, is already so fucking violent here in the United States, it actually echoes and rivals the violence that Israel is putting on its own apartheid state. So the day of the October 7th attack, the IDF had this to say. The IDF spokesperson has announced that the name of the IDF operation against Hamas terrorist organization is Operation Swords of Iron. What is this, a fucking Yu-Gi-Oh card? Did a new expansion pack of Warhammer 40k come out? Are we gonna meet on Friday night, order pizza, and play Dungeons and Dragons together? You'll realize how fucking stupid this makes you look. And keep in mind, that's on the State of Israel Instagram post. On October 12th, following the attack, the State of Israel posted a meme that says, "We have no other land. Thank you for standing with us." What the fuck does "we have no other land" mean? Were you affected by colonialism, driven out of your land? Did you experience the same thing that Native Americans went through? Well, before 1948, yeah, but after 1948, I think you're kind of misinterpreting things, my friend. Because if we're talking about the Jewish people, Jewish people, once again, are not all Israeli. They're not all white. They're not a monolith. Jewish people are a global people. They're a global religion. You have the whole fucking world, for crying out loud. So this is again why I said earlier in this podcast that to call Israel a Jewish state is like calling America a Christian nation. And there's something to be said about that. Near where I live, there's a person who waves the Christian nationalist flag, but also waves the Zionist flag. Why would a Christian nationalist, whom, by the way, for the record, Christian nationalists are anti-Semitic, they hate Jews. Why would Christian nationalists wave a Zionist flag? And I know my example is anecdotal here, but you know this isn't an isolated case. You know that Christian nationalists and evangelicals are advocating in favor of the settler colonial apartheid nation state that is Israel. Well, it's quite simple. Their reasons for doing this is also, shocker, anti-Semitic. They want all the Jews to go to one place so they can be killed off so that all the rest of the Christians can be sent to heaven after the rapture. Yeah, I told you it's anti-Semitic. It's very, very hateful of Jewish people. I urge my listeners to look up Christian Zionism. It's a thing. It's real. Look into it. It's very interesting. Because that should tell you, in terms of populism, who is really supporting Israel, the nation state here. And I think this is one of the biggest points I'm trying to make here, is that when we're talking about the nation state of Israel, we have to criticize it as a nation state. We criticize it for its actions as a nation state. We must also be equally careful when talking about Jewish people in terms of their relationship to this nation state. Because how Jewish people feel about the nation state of Israel is absolutely not united. Do some of them support Israel? Of course they do. But a lot of them don't. And a lot of them will tell you the very same things that I have been telling you in this podcast. All this meme that says we have no other land is doing is trying to justify their settler colonialism. It is also acknowledging that they were at one point refugees and Palestinians gave them refuge and they decided to steal their land. Because this isn't to also mention that Palestinian Jews, shocker, they exist. But I bring you back to my other earlier hypothetical. When Israel bombs a hospital, do they check to see if the patients are Palestinian Jews? Does the IDF go into the hospital and check with every patient and doctor and nurse to make sure that they are somehow a Palestinian Jew or not? All before bombing it? Oh my god, if you believe that, then holy shit, you're giving the IDF way too much credit. Here's another post from the State of Israel's Instagram page. There's a one from October 14th. It says, it's very simple. Hamas is ISIS. If you support Hamas, even with your silence, you are supporting ISIS. This right here is the most flat out example of generalization that I can find. What Israel is trying to do is to drum up support from American bigots who already hate Muslims to side with them in their genocide against Palestine. Which is really ironic because this is exactly what Joseph Biden instructed Israel to not do.
Scale may be different, but I'm sure those horrors have tapped into some kind of primal feeling in Israel just like it did and felt in the United States. Shock. Pain, rage, an all-consuming rage. I understand, and many Americans understand. You can't look at what has happened here to your mothers, your fathers, your grandparents, sons, daughters, children, even babies, and not scream out for justice. Justice must be done. But I caution this: while you feel that rage, don't be consumed by it. After 9/11, we were enraged in the United States. While we sought justice and got justice, we also made mistakes. I'm the first U.S. president to visit Israel in time of war. I've made wartime decisions. I know the choices are never clear or easy for the leadership.
Plus, we just gotta get to the root of all of this, right? Hamas and ISIS, they hate each other. Did you know that? It was actually even reported by the Times of Israel. A couple of the excerpts reads, ISIS views Hamas and its supporters as apostates. Hamas undertook mass arrests of supporters of ISIS. So then that means the state of Israel just contradicted its own state media. Wow, just wow. They really are trying to just drum up as much hatred as possible to really fuel the flames for this genocide. There's another one that's on Twitter that has a picture of what appears to be children's clothes, children's toys, children's coloring books, and a lot of just red substance on the ground that I think they're trying to convey is blood. And there's even a little bit of pink splattered all over the page. But that's interesting, because when blood gets old, it doesn't turn pink, it turns brown. And if it's not brown, it's like dark red. Deoxygenated blood like that should not be pink. Needless to say, this picture is staged. On Instagram, once again, the State of Israel posted on October 15th many sick people fighting about whether or not Hamas beheaded 40 babies or whether they were just burned alive or butchered. Shame on you! What? Who the fuck is debating this? I'm pretty sure that across the political spectrum, Hamas is pretty much hated. Even left-wing and sometimes even pro-Palestinian people do not like Hamas. I believe that this might be a form of projection from Israel to further fuel up hate. Because there's another post that follows this one on the same day. It says, "There is nothing valiant about Hamas's massacre of Israelis. Condemning Hamas for what it is, ISIS, is not anti-Palestine, and supporting Israelis in their fight against barbaric terrorists is the right thing to do." This is in response to Gigi Hadid, an American model who is also Palestinian on her father's side, and when growing up has expressed having experienced a lot of Islamophobia in her childhood. And what they're responding to is a post made by Gigi Hadid that says there is nothing Jewish about the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians. Condemning the Israeli government is not anti-Semitic, and supporting Palestinians is not supporting Hamas. I feel like this is such a non-problematic post that it's doing exactly what I've been saying this whole time, separating the individual and the people groups from the actions of the nation state. But it seems like, once again, Israel is trying to tell on itself that it doesn't care. It's going to do imperialism, and it doesn't care what Jewish people think, let alone Palestinians, because of course they're committing something called genocide. A couple of days later, on October 18th, the State of Israel once again posted another unhinged fucking off-the-rails post. People have spent days debating on how Hamas murdered Israeli babies. Last night, within seconds, some of you accused Israel of targeting a hospital, when evidence proved otherwise. What evidence? This Instagram account is perfectly capable of posting memes, videos, screenshots. It's capable of posting the most graphic shit ever. Oftentimes, when you look at this account on Instagram and you scroll through it, there's a lot of posts that are just blurred out because it's graphic content. Like this one post, which was not only blurred because it was so graphic, but they actually had false information on it. It was fact-checked. A couple of days earlier, on October 13th, they stated that Hamas posted a video of a doll, suggesting that it was part of the casualties caused by the IDF attack, which, my friends, is such a stretch. Like, such a stretch. Can you really imagine, like, Hamas taking, like, a doll and dressing it up with a little bit of blood on its cheek, and then wrapping it up for a PR picture for the rest of the world to see that, wow, people are totally dying in Palestine, this will get the IDF good. This is such like a smooth brain form of propaganda from the State of Israel. I kind of expected better. It seems like Joseph Biden is a professional at being an imperialist, because at least he does it with a smile on his face. He uses words that are softer. He doesn't fucking rage bait all of his fucking viewers and supporters. It just seems like he, as well as the American Empire and the American Empire's history of imperialism and violence, seems to have their skin in the game a lot longer than the State of Israel does. And for clarification, that is absolutely not a compliment for the United States, or any U.S. politician for that matter, on both sides of the political spectrum. Another post from the State of Israel, which took place on October 17, is a screenshot from J.K. Rowling. Yeah, really showing your solidarity with the LGBT community, y'all. I totally trust the nation state of Israel to not fucking lynch me when Project 2025 gets around. I, as a trans person, can absolutely refuge my way to the nation state of Israel when Israel's ally, being the United States, start passing laws that make it illegal to be transgender. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, J.K. Rowling is an immense transphobe and trans-exclusionary radical fascist. I don't want to give them the benefit of being known as feminists. And Rowling has had many chances to say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I didn't realize. No, she knows exactly what she's doing. And it's kind of fucking sad that Israel would fucking post a quote from her like this. But this is interesting because this is not only a quote from J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling is quoting the State of Israel on Twitter. So now this is a Twitter post from Israel quoted by J.K. Rowling, and the State of Israel is now once again on Instagram quoting J.K. Rowling. This is a fucking rabbit hole, y'all. So let's work our way up in chronological order. Israel posted on Twitter saying, this beautiful 12-year-old girl with autism was kidnapped from her home by Hamas terrorists and was taken to Gaza. Noya is sensitive, kind, funny, and a massive Harry Potter fan. J.K. Rowling, can you help us get her story out? Share this and help us bring Noya home. And before we continue, I just want to address what was said already so far by Israel. And that is, autism is being used now as a means to fucking, oh my god, it's, I really hate being tokenized. It's frustrating, right? Especially as someone who is transgender like myself, somebody who is autistic like myself, and they're honestly fucking pleading to a fucking transphobe who also hate people like me to fucking give credence to someone who is a victim of terrorism who is also autistic. This specific and unique form of gaslighting is intersectional, weirdly enough. J.K. Rowling would say, kidnapping children is despicable and wholly unjustified. For obvious reasons, this picture has hit home with me. May Noya and all the hostages taken by Hamas be returned soon, safely, and to their families. Interesting to note that J.K. Rowling is using they/them pronouns to describe one person who doesn't openly identify as transgender or non-binary, but I digress. By the way, Noya was found dead. And this right here is yet another example of them using the children to plead for the emotional vulnerability of their viewers and their followers. Now we have one more that I'm just gonna highlight here because this is taking way too fucking long, and oh my god, I want to just get to the point. On October 17th, the State of Israel posted, slaughtering children is not fighting for freedom. Slaughtering for children is not fighting for freedom. I agree. Just like how bombing Al Ali Arab Hospital on October 14th is also not fighting for freedom. And the IDF decides that it would be a good idea to not respond to inquiries about this strike, but that's why we're talking about social media, because the State of Israel is focusing so much on yearning to the people of social media to fucking fall for this shit. And I think this is where we really get to the problem at hand here, because all that I have talked about within the past 3/4 of an hour, we have talked about a very small part of the broader picture at hand here. If the attack that took place on October 7th by Hamas was an isolated incident, then I think this would be a more clearer picture here. But because this dates back farther back than several decades, like pretty close to nearing a goddamn century at this point, there's a clear history of Zionists pillaging Palestinian villages, all to make way for this colonial settlement. Is this what Theodore Herzl had planned in terms of a larger settlement for the Jewish people? Probably fucking not. Pretty good chance he didn't plan for an iron dome and the swords of iron and the iron gate and the fucking this shit and that shit and kaboom here. Probably didn't plan for a fucking genocide, for crying out loud. But that is what the Zionist movement evolved into. It evolved into a genocidal settler colonial movement. And it now takes the form of the nation state of Israel. And it would be disingenuous to say that people who criticize the state of Israel also support Hamas. But the problem here is that even though the United States, as well as the nation state of Israel, on its face is trying to convey the message that they are trying to stop Hamas, which is arguably a very violent and fundamentalist movement, at the same time, however, they are not speaking with their actions by bombing hospitals and killing children. And the state of Israel is spending a lot of time trying to repair its image while justifying and legitimizing this kind of violence in the first place. That's why, on its face, when it comes to anything that is being said by Israel about this issue, I cannot trust them. Like, not even a little bit. Because they are so openly biased in their own favor, and when challenged on it, they will turn around and say that what they're doing is much more gallant and noble than what they really are doing. It's horrifically disingenuous, and it needs to be called out consistently. And every time they continue to tokenize, marginalize, and colonize people to further propagate the legitimacy of their genocide, it kind of just makes me a little bit angrier. So that's why I really had a lot to say here, because I'm kind of fucking sick and tired of Israel and the United States being allies, while we at home are also experiencing a wave of anti-LGBT hatred, both socially and in legislation. It's such hypocrisy and it's such cognitive dissonance that it kind of just hurts my brain to just think about it for a moment. But I also think that this is a good time to explain that there is a contradiction when it comes to the interests of the state and the interests of the people. The examples that I gave here about the state of Israel posting on Instagram like a fucking ranting lunatic is not an isolated incident. In fact, this happens in the United States all the time. And everything that Joe Biden has said about the war on terror that was committed by the United States, that in and of itself is said with regret in his tone. Because he knows that that war on terror was a fucking farce. Not to mention, it also has a deeper history that predates 9/11 itself. Need I mention the Mujahideen guerrillas in Afghanistan throughout the 80s fighting a proxy war for the United States against the Soviet Union, and one of those people happens to be Osama bin Laden, and he was once regarded as an anti-Soviet hero. Also having his own royal family's investment into the Carlyle Group along with the Bush family. And not to mention, the Bush family has their money interested elsewhere, like in the Union Banking Corporation of New York City during the Holocaust. You can thank Fritz Thyssen and Prescott Bush for that relation. Yeah, war, money, economics, capitalism, imperialism, genocide, it runs deep, and it has a lot of history with some really fucking bad people. So when we look at the bigger picture, as opposed to just focusing on October 7th, we can see that things are just not as clear-cut and simple or even myopic as people try to make the conversation to be. So to wrap this up, I want people to come away from this podcast with a few concepts here. First of all, nation states and its actions do not equate to the people that it governs over. Hamas is not every Palestinian, and Israel is definitely not every Jew. Israel and its behavior is just like any other nation state. It is imperialistic and it is explicitly at odds with its own people. And criticizing Israel and the IDF is not blaming the victim. Blaming the victim would be like saying that the people who died on October 7th deserved it, which they did not. But that is to say that Israel has every opportunity to create a diplomacy with Palestine. And as at odds as Palestinians are with Hamas, if it has gotten to the point to where Hamas, a political party that barely has 56% of the parliament, is choosing to attack and not make diplomacy, then there's probably a reason for that. It's because Israel has not allowed for the opportunity for that to happen in the first place, at least not on both terms. Will there be diplomacy? I don't fucking know. But what I do know is that we need to help the people who are the most vulnerable in this situation, and that is the people. I strongly urge people to donate to the Medical Aid for Palestinians, the Gaza Mutual Aid Collective, Beit Jamal, Islamic Relief USA, DirectRelief.org, the fundraiser conducted for Palestinian Mutual Aid, organized by Firestorm, and I'll put all of these links in the description for you all to check out. Just keep in mind, however, that they help with different things. Some help with medical crisis, food crisis, clothing, supplies, hygienic products, etc., so on and so forth. If you feel that I have left out something that is crucially important with not just the list of charities that you can reach out to, but also to this analysis, please let me know, because admittedly, the media that is being portrayed here in the United States is not anything short of what I would call Pravda quality here. Most of the media that Americans consume is either corporate or state media, and both have their own biases, especially in their own political interests. I just think that we can all acknowledge here that no one deserves to die, but at the same time, we can also equally acknowledge that the nation state of Israel is an unjustified apartheid settler colonial state, and that Palestinians are being genocided, not just right now, but they have been for nearly a century. I just think that people who either support Israel or the state of Israel themselves are doing such a bad job trying to represent themselves that it comes off as them trying to control the narrative, especially with the wealth of privilege that they have being a powerful nation state with loads of other global superpowers behind their backs. We do not need any more bloodshed. We need a ceasefire, and we need diplomacy. We need the abolition of the state. We need abolition of capitalism. We need abolition of imperialism. We must continue to recognize the contradictions within the role of the state and how it is inherently antagonistic towards the people that they govern over. This is true for every state, not just Israel, not just the United States, and not just any one singular player in the hegemonic game for power grabbing. No, the whole damn system. The whole damn system must come down. I am advocating for none other than anarchism, especially at a time when states need to trick their own civilians that they govern over to feel sorry for them, putting their own place in power and legitimizing their own stance in dominance, all prioritized over the importance of people's lives. Because if the State of Israel and the IDF took what happened on October 7th seriously, it would have been a wake-up call for them to finally strike something diplomatic with Palestine. But that's not what they're doing. So when we talk about Israel and Palestine, we have to punch upward, not downward. We gotta analyze this dialectically, and not fall for the emotional pleadings of a nation state that is begging to do genocide. Thank you.